My parents disowned me for choosing photography. Now they want $100,000 after finding out I make six figures. Hi there. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and for the past 6 years, I've been working as a fashion photographer. Photography has always been something I felt really passionate about, so instead of going the traditional college route, I decided to dive right in. Right after high school, I applied for internships with established photographers, and luckily, I landed one not long after graduating. Now, that first internship wasn't exactly with a big-name photographer. He wasn't well known in the industry at all. Hardly anyone had heard of him, honestly. But I didn't mind. I was just grateful to be getting my foot in the door, doing something I loved. Over time, I got to assist more photographers, observe their techniques, and really study their work. The more time I spent on set, the more confident I became in my own abilities. By the time I turned 22, I booked my first solo shoot, and from that moment on, things started rolling. I haven't looked back since. These past few years, I've done pretty well for myself actually. I've consistently made six figures annually, which is something I'm incredibly proud of. But the sad part is, my family has never acknowledged any of that. They don't see what I do as real success. To them, being a photographer means I'm just someone who hangs around in the background. And sure, we're not in the spotlight like the models we shoot, and unless you're a big deal in the industry, most people don't really know your name. I get that. I'm not there yet. Maybe that's why every time I visit home, my parents take it as an opportunity to remind me that my younger brother has accomplished so much more than I have, and that I should really do something more respectable instead of wasting my time with photography. Honestly, they've never been proud of me. Growing up, my brother was always their golden child, the so-called genius of the family. He's 2 years younger than me, but even back in school, he was top of his class, always getting straight A's. Meanwhile, I was the creative one. I was drawn to music, theater, and sports, things that didn't quite fit into their idea of success. I was an average student, and they never let me forget that. They were constantly comparing me to him, pushing me to measure up to the standard he set, even though I had different strengths. We used to argue about it all the time until I finally realized that no matter what I did, they weren't going to see my worth. So, I stopped trying to win their approval and started tuning them out. Things really hit a breaking point after high school when I told them I wasn't going to college and was going to pursue fashion photography instead. They absolutely lost it. We fought for months. Eventually, they told me if I chose that path over getting a degree, they would never forgive me and wouldn't be part of my life anymore. But I stood my ground. At that point, I knew their approval couldn't be my focus. I had to prioritize my dreams. So, I followed my heart and went for it. It wasn't easy. For a few years, they didn't speak to me at all, which was especially hard because I was so young and trying to make it on my own. During that time, I had to lean on other family members for support, mostly financial help, because before that, I'd only ever worked part-time summer jobs, and that money didn't stretch far. I was living in a new city, working unpaid internships or earning barely enough to scrape by. Thankfully, my aunt, my dad's older sister, stepped in. She'd send me money when I needed it, helping me get by. Her daughter and I had always been close, almost like sisters, so she naturally had a soft spot for me. Still, it wasn't easy. Even with her help, I often felt incredibly lonely. My parents and my brother had basically cut me out of their lives. It was like I disappeared the moment I left home. My aunt never told my dad she was supporting me financially because she knew it would cause problems. He would have accused her of encouraging me to throw my life away. But she kept me in the loop about how they were feeling. Every time she visited them, she'd bring me up in conversation. Most of the time, their response was cold. They'd either say something dismissive or quickly change the subject. Hearing that always stung. But then, one year, completely out of the blue, they insisted I come home for the holidays. They said it was time to reconnect. I figured maybe this was a turning point, so I agreed to go back and give our relationship another shot. I expected some kind of emotional reunion, but instead, everything felt strangely normal. Later, my mom admitted they only reached out because they finally realized I wasn't going to give up on photography, and they didn't want to seem like the kind of parents who didn't support their kids' dreams. Basically, it was about saving face, not about truly accepting me or what I had chosen to do with my life. That realization hurt more than I expected, but I still decided to stay in touch. I kept hoping that with time, they might come around. So I started sharing updates with them, big moments, successes, milestones. I wanted them to see that I was doing just fine. But no matter what I told them, it never seemed to matter as much as what my brother was doing. He got a business degree and landed a job with one of my dad's friends. He makes good money, and my parents never stopped talking about how proud they are that he started supporting them financially as soon as he got his first paycheck. It's not like I haven't offered to help them myself. I have. But they always turned me down. They said they didn't feel comfortable accepting money from me because they weren't sure I could afford it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't really concern talking. That was just another subtle jab, another way of telling me that, in their eyes, my brother would always be the one they counted on and I'd never quite measure up, no matter how well I was doing. It started sinking in a long time ago. I was never going to be enough for my parents. Even when I tried to reassure them that I was doing fine and could support them if they ever needed it, they didn't believe me. Instead, they leaned on my brother, like they always had. And it wasn't like they didn't need the help. After the pandemic hit, their financial situation took a nosedive. My parents ran a small cafe, and it had already been struggling. When the pandemic shut everything down, they lost a huge chunk of their savings. About 2 years ago, they ended up closing the cafe for good and decided to retire early. That's when my brother stepped in to support them financially, and that's also when they made it crystal clear they didn't want or need anything from me. I can't lie, it was a slap in the face. After that, I didn't bother trying to stay in regular contact with them. I'd see them now and then at family gatherings, and I'd always be polite, but that was the extent of it. I stopped going home for the holidays, too. I knew that even if I did show up, all I'd get was criticism, backhanded comments, and more of the same tired lectures. I didn't need that negativity anymore. I was done. Things between us have only gone downhill since then. These days, we barely speak at all. Very few people in my family know how bad things really are, mostly because I don't like bringing it up. But one of the few people who's in the loop is my cousin, the one who recently got engaged. She threw an engagement party a few days ago. My parents were invited, of course, and so was I, but I couldn't make it. I was down with the flu. While I was absent, my cousin ended up having a pretty interesting conversation with my parents, which led to them calling me after years of silence. But before I get into the phone call itself, I should explain what my cousin told me. Right after I heard from my parents, I gave her a call to ask what happened. She said that at the engagement party, my parents were going on and on about how my brother had just gotten a major promotion at work, supposedly one that would double his salary. I don't know if that's actually true or if they were just inflating things to impress people. Either way, my cousin told me it was getting on her nerves. Not only were my parents hijacking the whole event by making it all about them and my brother, but they were acting like I didn't even exist, as if they had one child, not two. And she knows me well enough to understand that no matter how much I try to pretend their behavior doesn't get to me, it still does. I've done really well for myself, but it never seems to be enough to make them proud. That hurts more than I like to admit. So my cousin decided to step in. While my parents were bragging about my brother, she casually mentioned how amazing it was that they now had 2 children earning 6 figures. That clearly threw them off. Since they hadn't bothered keeping in touch with me, they had no idea how well I'd been doing. And I had never shared those details with them because I didn't think it was something they needed to know. She didn't elaborate after that, just left it hanging in the air. And wouldn't you know it, the very next day, I got a phone call from my parents. I was honestly stunned when I saw their names pop up on my phone. When I answered, they didn't even ease into it. They came right out and asked if it was true that I'd been making 6 figures for the past couple of years. Thinking naively that maybe they were finally proud of me, I decided to be honest and tell them, yeah, I had. But wow, was I wrong for thinking this was going to be a turning point? Instead of celebrating with me, they went straight into accusing mode. They were angry, yes, angry that I hadn't told them sooner. They said they couldn't believe they'd been putting so much pressure on my brother to support them financially when I was apparently doing just fine. They told me I should have informed them about my income so they could have made a better decision about which child should be helping them out. I was completely speechless. I mean, who responds like that? But in hindsight, I should have expected it. That reaction was completely in line with everything they've done before. And if that wasn't enough to leave me dumbfounded, what came next absolutely floored me. When I didn't say anything, mostly because I was still trying to process the sheer nerve of what they were saying, they doubled down. They said they felt bad that my brother hadn't been able to save enough for his future because he'd been too busy covering their expenses. And since, according to them, I'd been living a cushy life, they thought it was only fair that I pay them $100,000 as reparations. They said I needed to share the responsibility now, as their daughter, too. They made it sound like I had never offered to help, as if I'd been dodging some kind of duty this whole time. In reality, they were the ones who turned their backs on me and refused my help right from the start. At that point, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I just started laughing. It wasn't the polite kind of laugh either. It was that shocked, slightly hysterical laugh you get when something's so absurd you don't know how else to react. I hung up on them right after that. I didn't see the point in saying anything else. Later, I talked to my cousin and got the full rundown. Since then, I've been doing everything I can to avoid them altogether. I blocked their number after that call, but they didn't give up. They started texting me from some burner number, which I blocked too. Their messages were all about how it was unfair of me to hide how much I'd been earning. They said if they'd known earlier, they would have accepted my help and spared my brother the burden. Right. Like I hadn't already offered. Even my brother, who usually keeps his distance from all this drama, ended up messaging me. He said he didn't want to take sides, but he did think our parents had a point. He admitted that they'd treated me unfairly and should have been more supportive, but then added that if I had really wanted to help them in the beginning, maybe I should have tried harder to make them accept it. Maybe my brother was right about one thing. I probably should have just told our parents exactly how much I was making. I guess it's fair to say that they've never really understood what I do for a living. Photography isn't a world they're familiar with, so they had no way of knowing I'd been doing this well. That part, I can admit. He also told me that even though he's been the one supporting our parents financially so far, it's technically my responsibility too. Like it or not, they're still our parents, and they raised me, so I supposedly owe them. And honestly, I'm feeling a little conflicted about it all now. Not for my parents, I don't feel guilty toward them, but for my brother. We've never been especially close, but it's never been hostile between us either. And the more I think about it, the more I hate to admit that maybe, just maybe, he has a point about me not being totally upfront. So, let me explain why I never told my parents exactly how much money I make, even when I offered to help. It's pretty simple. First of all, I just don't like talking about my income. When I say I can help financially, I expect the person I'm offering help to, especially my own parents, to trust that I mean it. Why would I lie about that? Also, I don't measure success by how much money I bring in. I know plenty of people do, but that's just not how I think. I felt successful when I landed my first shoot at 22. I felt successful when I chased my dream instead of going to college, even when everything was stacked against me. And yeah, I feel successful now, too, but not because of the number in my bank account. It's because I'm happy and proud of what I've built for myself. What I really wanted, what I always wanted, was for my parents to be proud of me because I was doing what I loved and thriving in my own way. Not just because I was earning a lot. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone, but for me, success and money aren't the same thing. Honestly, it didn't even cross my mind that I'd need to lay out my exact income just to earn their respect. I guess a part of me, maybe the delusional part, was still holding out hope that one day, they'd start treating me like they treated my brother. That maybe, eventually, I'd be seen as enough. But that day never came. And that's how we ended up here. When I brought this up to my cousin, she told me I hadn't done anything wrong. She said I shouldn't have to spell out how much I make just to be treated like their daughter. That really helped me feel a little less crazy. My aunt agrees with her too. What's been weighing on me lately, though, is the fact that my brother, who had always stayed kind of neutral in the past, has now taken their side. That's what's really messing with my head. I haven't figured out yet if I should feel guilty or just let it go. I'm still trying to sort it all out, and honestly, I'm open to hearing advice from others. Update 1. I just wanted to say thank you for all the comments. Reading through them really helped open my eyes. I think I needed that reality check, because for a minute there, I actually started to doubt myself. But now, I don't anymore. After thinking it over, I decided to block my brother too. It hit me that even though he'd always stayed on the sidelines and never picked a fight with me, that neutral stance didn't actually help me. Not once did he stand up for me, not like my cousin did, or my aunt. And honestly, the only reason he's defending our parents now is because they've always treated him well. They never gave him a reason to see things from my perspective. But I've got plenty of reasons. More than enough. Before I blocked him, I did send him one final message. I told him I appreciated that he was defending our parents, but the truth is, the version of them that he knows is not the one I grew up with. He'll never truly understand what I went through. So for him to say that I owe our parents just because they raised me? That felt incredibly unfair. They didn't do me a favor by raising me, it's literally what they were supposed to do. Legally, morally, however you want to look at it. And the moment I turned 18, I left home to chase my dreams, and they cut me off. No contact. No support. My aunt was the only one there for me, and my cousin was the only one who ever emotionally supported me. My parents and my brother were nowhere to be found. So when people say I owe something to my family, I have to ask, which family? Because the people who actually showed up for me weren't the ones who gave birth to me. And as for my brother covering for our parents these past few years, how is that my fault? I tried to help. They turned me away. I remember exactly how they made me feel, and that memory is what made me step away from them. They didn't seem to mind back then. But now that they know I'm doing well, all of a sudden they want me to make it up to them without so much as an apology? It's entitled. It's unfair. And I don't have the energy for it anymore. After I sent that message to my brother, I knew I was done. I blocked him and haven't heard from him since. But my aunt did reach out. She told me that after my brother got that message from me where I mentioned how she supported me when no one else did, he must have shared it with my dad. And just like we expected, my dad lost it. He's been accusing my aunt of turning me against them, saying that if she hadn't enabled me, I would have eventually come back home and followed their rules. According to him, everything that's gone wrong between us is her fault. I seriously don't understand that line of thinking. How do they not see that they pushed me away themselves? Honestly, even if my aunt hadn't stepped in to help me back then, I would have still found a way to follow my dreams. It might have taken longer, and it definitely would have been harder, but I wasn't about to give up on photography. That was never on the table. And let's be real, if I hadn't become a photographer, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be doing so well, earning a solid income from a job I genuinely love. But if that path had been taken from me, I know I would have ended up resenting my parents for the rest of my life for keeping me from building something that was truly mine. So I can't understand how they think things would have been better between us if I'd just given in and done what they wanted. If anything, that would have driven an even deeper wedge between us. Right now, they just need someone to blame, and that person, conveniently, is my aunt. They've been bombarding her with messages, saying that if she were a good sister, she would have sent me back to them instead of encouraging my bad behavior. Apparently, I'm acting this way because people like her have been rewarding me for it all along. They even dragged my cousin into it. According to them, it's no wonder my aunt's daughter turned out to be rude and classless, considering she's being raised by someone who couldn't even manage her own family. All this just because my cousin dared to speak the truth at her engagement party. At this point, my parents are just spiraling. My aunt has blocked them, but we both know that's not going to stop them. They're determined to play the victims here, spinning their own version of the story, pretending like none of this was their doing. And if, after everything, my brother still wants to stand by their side, then there's really nothing left for me to say to him. Looking back, I probably should have seen this coming. Sure, he never treated me poorly, but he never once stood up for me either. So maybe this isn't all that surprising. Update 2. Hey again, so it's been about 2 weeks since my last update, and I honestly don't know what my parents were thinking, but they've decided to take all this drama public. I can't imagine what they think this is going to accomplish, but over the last few days, they've made a series of posts online, dragging me and my aunt through the mud. They're spinning this narrative where my aunt encouraged me to follow an unstable career in photography, even though they were totally against it. Then they claim they tried to reconcile with me, but I was the one who pushed them away. According to them, when they recently asked for help, I acted like I didn't make enough money, so they had no choice but to rely on my brother. And now that they know the truth about my finances, I'm supposedly refusing to help and putting all the pressure on him instead. It's all one-sided, full of exaggerations or outright lies, and completely ignores everything they've done. Neither my aunt nor I want to play this out on social media, but we have tried texting them directly, asking them to take the posts down. I even threatened legal action, though I think they realized I was bluffing. Let's face it, no one's hiring a lawyer for petty family drama. It's not ruining my life or anything, but it's been a pain. A bunch of people I haven't spoken to in years are suddenly messaging me, asking about the situation like it's some reality TV show. I hate that they're treating this like entertainment. That's why I want the posts gone. But if my parents keep refusing, then my aunt and I are going to have to respond publicly, too. We didn't want to go down that road, but at this point, it's looking more and more likely. My cousin thinks we should just do it and get it over with. Honestly, I'm exhausted by all the drama, but I know what needs to be done. Update 3. It's been 2 days since that last update, and well, we ended up doing it. My aunt and I finally posted our side of the story. And not just our side, but the actual truth. We laid it all out, not to start drama, but because we were tired of letting people believe a warped version of events. So far, my parents haven't said a word in response. But we've gotten an overwhelming amount of support from others. Turns out, the rest of the family wasn't as blind to all this as I thought. A lot of them admitted they'd noticed the favoritism all along, how my parents always bragged about my brother and barely acknowledged me. Knowing that people actually saw it, even if they never spoke up before, means more to me than I can say. It feels good to finally be seen. My parents still haven't reached out to me directly, but my brother did. He sent me an email saying what I'd done was seriously messed up. He claimed he'd been trying to calm our parents down, that he had almost convinced them to remove their posts, but now they were more determined than ever to keep them up. He told me he didn't expect me to be the one adding fuel to the fire. And he's right about one thing: I didn't want this. I never intended for things to explode like this. But I didn't start this mess, our parents did. All I did was share the truth so people wouldn't continue to judge me or my aunt unfairly. If they didn't want the world to know how they treated me, maybe they should have thought twice before broadcasting half-truths and smearing us online. At this point, I have nothing left to say to my brother. He's clearly chosen his side. As for my parents, I haven't wanted to speak to them in a long time. If they decide to cut me out of their lives for good, that's fine by me. Update 4. Hey folks, it's been a few months since I last checked in. I recently returned home for my cousin's wedding, where I was honored to be her maid of honor. I spent nearly a month there, helping her prep for the big day and making sure everything ran smoothly. She had told me ahead of time that neither my parents nor my brother were invited. Honestly, that didn't surprise me. After everything that went down, it was pretty clear my aunt and cousin had no desire to include them. And really, after all the noise they made online without so much as a single apology, they should have known they wouldn't be welcome. But somehow, they were still shocked. Not only had they expected to be invited, but when the invitations didn't come, they had the nerve to show up at my aunt's house, furious. My dad, especially, was outraged. He told her she couldn't just cut him out over something so small. The irony? This is the same man who cut me out of his life years ago without a second thought. My aunt didn't let him get away with it, though. She stood her ground and told him exactly how things were going to be. They had a huge blowout that day, and since then, my parents have been going around bad-mouthing us to anyone who'll listen. But honestly, it's just gossip at this point. No one's taking them seriously, not the people who matter, anyway. I haven't heard a word from my brother since, and yeah, it's sad that he's fully aligned himself with our parents. But that's his decision to make. The wedding itself was beautiful, everything went off without a hitch. I got to spend real, quality time with my aunt and cousin, and it felt like the family I'd always wanted. Being surrounded by people who actually love and support me? That was the real gift. Now that I'm back at work, I feel refreshed, recharged, and sure of one thing above all else, my parents haven't changed. Not in the last few months, and probably not ever.